All right, Jabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share, to thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsors, the Tilsa Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael. We're dedicating all the Shimon Droshos this year as his chus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan, Haba Alinu Latova, Paul Palak, in celebration of the Nisan birthdays of his wife Kathy and his granddaughter Tikva Esther, and on the birth of a grandson to Ida and Jeremiah Pollack of Indianapolis, Indiana. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Anonymous Talmud Torah sponsorship in the schools of Simchos for all of our children, and for Nisan to be the month of Geula Shlema for Klal Yisrael. Amen. Avram Shendi Kelman, in memory of Avram's mother, Sarah Braina Bas Yoshua Heschel, Zichron Livracha. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families, all of those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Chole Yisrael. The Kodesh Baruch Hu should Emir Hashem bring our hostages home, B'Shalom and B'Karv, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'Chol Maaseh Yedehem. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Gimel 3. We are picking up on Beis Amud Beis. 12 lines up from the bottom. My Taimahu Drabanan. So it says, remember again in yesterday's daf, what we ended up with was as follows. We saw the Gemara highlighted three unique things, unique qualities that apply to Eidim Zomim. Rabbi Akiva added on a fourth. And interestingly enough, one of the things that we saw about Eidim Zomim is that they don't pay kofar. Right? Remember again, if my ox goes ahead and kills someone, there is a payment that's called kofar, which means atonement. Atonement payment. So Eidim Zomim do not pay kofar. So remember again, the Gemara began with a discussion. Well, what is kofar? Is kofar kapara? Right? Is kofar ultimately an atonement payment? Is it mammon? Is it a monetary payment? So the Gemara ultimately ended off with the fact that kofar is kapara. Right? Kofar is an atonement payment. There's machlokes over here between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Shmuel about how you value that payment. According to Rabbi Shmuel, bidmazik sheminan. We go ahead and we value the payment ultimately again based on the value of the damager, which makes sense because since it's an atonement payment, therefore Allah he has to, so to speak, give his value. Rabbi Rabbanon on the other hand hold bidmazik sheminan. We go ahead and we value the payment based on the value of the damaged party. So that's where we're picking up. Why is it that now here's what's interesting is this seems to be inherently contradictory. If you hold that kofar, the kofar payment is a kapara, is an atonement payment, right? If that's what it is, then logically, what should it be? What should the value be based on? What should the value be based on? The damager, right? If I'm the person whose ox killed Ruvain, so the Maisa makes sense that I have to pay my worth. In other words, again, something of mine took the life of another. I should have to pay my value. That makes sense. But according to the Rabbanon, who said that you pay the value of the victim, what's the pshat? So here we go. So the Gemara says as follows: Nemar hashasa lemata, v'nemar hashasa lemala. So more interestingly enough, it says hashasa. Now hashasa means to impose a payment upon someone. So it says hashasa lemata, and again Rashi points out over here, Nemar hashasa lemata, or lemala, excuse me. He says beno gave isha hara kasha yashes ala bala isha. So there's two cases. Case number one is where two men are fighting, Reuven and Shimon are fighting, and Reuven goes ahead and bumps into a pregnant woman, causing her to miscarry. So the Torah explains that halacha l'maisa, the Reuven, the perpetrator, has to go ahead and pay for the miscarriage. Now what does that mean? He pays a value. Now what's the value? The value is the value of the victim, right? The difference in value between a woman who's pregnant and a woman who's not pregnant. So Reuven goes ahead and has to pay that amount. So the Torah uses the word hashasa, which means we impose a financial penalty, or we impose a penalty upon the perpetrator of the damage. So the Gemara says, "V'nemar hashasa l'mala, mala halon b'dinizak afkam b'dinizak." So it says hashasa by the damaging of a pregnant woman. It says hashasa by kofar, just like hashasa by the pregnant woman. Everyone agrees b'dinizak sheminan. We evaluate damages based on the value of the victim. So too again in the hashasa. So too when it comes to valuation of damages or valuation of kofar, we do it by the value of the victim. Okay, for Rabbi Shmuel, now Rabbi Shmuel, who holds again that halacha l'maisa, Kofar is based on the value of the damager. He says something very simple. The Torah says, "V'nasan pidyon nafsho." You have to give a redemption for your soul, which sounds like, again, you have to give your value, the damager's value. To which the Gemara says, "V'rabanan in pidyon nafsho ksiv." Yeah, it's true that everyone's agreeing with this. Everyone is agreeing that kofar ultimately, again, is kapara. Kofar ultimately, again, is an atonement. But nevertheless, how do we value that atonement? So it's true, it's an atonement payment. But how do we evaluate that atonement payment? Ultimately based on the value of the damaged party. Okay, so we'll say, so what comes out of here is as follows. Now remember, for our purposes, ultimately what comes out is really two pieces of information. Number one, Edim Zomin don't pay kofar. So, for example, just to illustrate the case, Edim Zomin show up in Beis Din. What are they testifying to? They're claiming that we saw Ruvain's ox kill Shimon. Okay? It turns out, second set of witnesses show up. You couldn't have seen that. You were with us at that time. They're Edim Zomin. Normally, reciprocal punishment. No reciprocal punishment over here. Why not? Because we've established kofar is kapara, is an atonement payment. So it doesn't make sense to impose an atonement payment upon the Edim. Why? They didn't do anything. I mean, they did something. They testified falsely, but they didn't do anything in that. They didn't kill anyone. Their ox didn't kill anyone. So therefore, you can't impose an atonement payment on someone who has not committed the infraction. So that's our purpose. Now, the Gemara about that as an aside, there's another raging machlokes about how do you evaluate the kofar payment. Rabbi Shmuel says, "B'demasik sheminan." So Reuven, the owner of the ox, will pay to Shimon, to Shimon's heirs. Ultimately, again, Reuven's value, his own value. It's his atonement payment. And again, the Rabbanan hold no, but the nizak sheminan, the payment ultimately again is in accordance with the value of the victim. So that machlokes is still here. We're not wading into that too much right now. But for our purpose is now Edim Zomin is what we're focusing on. Good. Next, Vein Nimkarim be'Eved Ivri. This is interesting. Edim Zomin are not sold as an Eved Ivri. Now, what does this mean? So remember again, halacha l'maaseh, here's the case. Witnesses 1 and 2 show up, and what do they say? We saw Reuven steal from Shimon. Now, Reuven does not have the money to pay back the theft. In general, if you steal and don't have the money to pay back the theft, what's the halacha? You're sold as an Eved Ivri. So they're testifying against Reuven that he stole. Reuven doesn't have the money to pay back, which means under these circumstances, Reuven would be sold as an Eved Ivri. Okay? So the halacha is, if it turns out that they're made into Edim Zomamin, we don't impose reciprocal punishment. They're not sold as Eved Ivri. So the Gemara says, Rav Hamnuna said, when is this so? Hanimili, Hecha de Islay Ledidei. That's ultimately, again, when Reuven himself had money. Reuven himself had money, so Reuven himself would not have been sold as a slave. Demigo di'ihu lo nizdabin, inu lami lo nizdabnu. So since ultimately, again, Reuven himself wouldn't have been sold because Reuven has money to pay back the stolen amount, so too the Edim wouldn't be sold as well. Okay. Aval hecha de lesle ledidei. Listen to this. Rav Hamnuna wants to suggest, but if Reuven doesn't have money, right, and therefore Reuven would have been sold, even though the Edim do have money, right? So if Reuven didn't have money, even if the Edim do have money, mizdamnu, the Edim are sold. Wow. So I'll say that's intense, right? So if the witnesses are testifying that Reuven stole from Shimon and Reuven doesn't have money, so if found guilty, Reuven would have been sold. Now it turns out that the Edim are Edim zomamin, the Edim are sold. The Edim are sold. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Amalei Rava, Balei Mrulei, I'ant Havalach, mi have mizdamt. Why can't the witness say this? Reuven, hold up over here. You know, Reuven, if you had money, you wouldn't have been sold either. Nami lo biznamdinon. Why should the witnesses be sold if they have money? In other words, halacha l'maisa, even if Reuven would have been sold, but if Reuven would have had money, he could have bought himself out. If you want to impose reciprocal punishment upon the Edim, so good, go ahead and say if they don't have money, they can be sold also. But l'maisa, if they do have money, why shouldn't they be able to buy themselves out of servitude? Ella, Gemara says, you're right. Ella Rav Hamnuna l'meimar, Rav Hamnuna said as follows. As Rav Hamnuna said, Tani mili, hecha de islay oli didei oli didohu. So we'll say, when do we say that Edim are not sold as an Eved Ivri? When is that? When someone in the equation has money, right? Either Reuven himself, right, or the witnesses, right? Because if Reuven himself has money, that means Reuven wouldn't have been sold. If Reuven wouldn't have been sold, you can't sell the witnesses. Or even if Reuven doesn't have money. So Reuven would have been sold. And now we seek to impose reciprocal punishment upon the Eidim. The Eidim can say, look, we do have money. So again, we're willing to pay. But again, just like Reuven, if you had money, you could have bought yourself out of servitude. So too, if we have money, we should also be able to buy ourselves out of servitude. So that's the halakha. So listen to this. Aval heicha delesle lo lididei velo lidido mizdabni. But halacha l'maisa, but if Hamnuna says, but when neither Reuven nor the Eidim have money, then what's the halacha? The witnesses are sold. Incredible, right? So in a case where no one has money, right? Reuven doesn't have money, the Eidim don't have money, no one has money, which means that Reuven would have been sold as an Eved Ivri, and the witnesses don't have, the Eidim don't have money either. In that case, they would be sold into servitude. That's Rav Hamnuna. Now again, Amalei Rav said, no, absolutely not. That is not the halacha. Rav says, no, it's not true. The concept of being sold as an Eved Ivri is a unique halacha that applies to the thief himself. It doesn't apply for the reciprocal punishment of Eidim Zomimim. So we begin to see this theme emerging, right? As much as the Torah prescribes, reciprocity for Eidim Zomimim, there are certain punishments that are dafka reserved for the actual perpetrator of the crime that cannot be replicated in a reciprocal scenario. So again, for over here, the concept of being sold as an Eved Ivri is dafka something that is reserved for the thief himself, for the person who steals, you borrow, you steal, you can't pay back that which you have stolen, you're sold as an Eved Ivri. When Eidim Zomim come into the picture, they could be forced to pay the value of the theft, right, or the accused theft. Supposedly there was no actual theft, right? But the might say they can't be sold. Same thing with kofar, right? Kofar is an atonement payment. Who has to pay an atonement payment? The person who committed the crime, right? The person who committed the act. But if you didn't commit the act, then there's no such thing as an atonement payment for you. Okay, so that's the halacha. Good. So I'll say that's the end of the list. Next, Rabbi Akiva almost remember Rabbi Akiva added in. Af ein mishalmin al pi atzman. This is interesting. Rabbi Akiva added in also over here. In addition to the first three, Rabbi Yehuda said Eidim Zomim also can't pay or aren't made to pay based on their own admission. Okay, so what's the case? My time Rabbi Akiva. What's Rabbi Akiva's logic? Kasavar knasahu uknas mishalmin al pi atzmo. Very simple. We'll say the reciprocal payment is a knas. Remember again, in the world of financial payments, there are two different types of payments. What are the two different types of payments? Number one, mamon, which is actual compensation, compensatory payments, or knas, which is a penalty. Right? How do you know there's in knas and mamon? Mamon is logical, knas is illogical. Right? So that in other words, when I say illogical means it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the actual value of the damage committed. Eidim Zomim is a knas. It's a penalty. So Rabbi Akiva says like this: there is a principle that when it comes to knas, ultimately again you cannot pay a knas based on your own admission, or as we've stated it before, modeh b'knas pater. If you admit that you owe a penalty payment, you're pater. So therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva says if witnesses show up, right, to Beis Din, and witnesses say, we are Eidim Zomim, we're like, okay, have a nice day, but we're not going to impose reciprocal punishment upon them because it's knas, and modeh b'knas pater. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Teda, Sharla Asumaisa, B'nehera Ginu Mishalmin. So the Gemara says, Rabba says, I'll show you how it's a knas. How do I know that it's a knas? Eidim Zomim did not actually do a maisa. Right, the most right. He asked, "What did Eidim Zomim do? What do they do? It was speech. So speech dibur is not a ma'isa. Yet, even though they didn't do a ma'isa, technically speaking, they could be executed. Now, when could they be executed? Again, in a case where they show up and they say, "We saw Reuven kill Shimon," right on Friday. And then the second set of witnesses show up and say, "No, you couldn't have been there on Friday because you were with us on Friday." Eidim Zomim, and we put them to death. So Rabbi says, just if you want to understand how we know that Eidim Zomim are a knas. Just look at the mechanics of it, right? Just look at the mechanics. At the end of the day, they didn't actually do a maisa yet. They can still be put to death. That shows that it's a knas. Right? Rav Nachman comes along and Rav Nachman says, I'll show you it's knas as well. Look, Edim Zomin, for example, let's say they claimed Ruvain went ahead and Ruvain borrowed $1,000 from Shimon and he didn't pay back. Okay, then if it turns out that they're Edim Zomin, they have to pay $1,000. Meanwhile, money never left Ruvain's hands. All they're doing is testifying. Despite the fact that they did not actually cause Ruvain a loss of money, nevertheless, what? They have to pay. What does that show you? That it's knas. So the Gemara says, top of Gimel. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Now, it sounds like from the way the Gemara is structured that Rabbah and Rav Nachman are saying two different things. But the truth is, they seem to be saying the same exact thing, which is, how do you know that Edim Zoman is a knas? Because at the end of the day, there was no maisa, right? There was no action, yet halacha lamaisa, there's still liabilities. So the Gemara says, my nihu de lo asa maisa. So again, Rav Nachman, you're saying the same thing as Rabbah, right? Rabbah said, Edim Zomin didn't even do a Maisa, yet they could be put to death. And Rav Nachman says, essentially, they didn't even do a Maisa because look, they didn't even extract money from one party, yet they can still be liable. So Rav Nachman, aren't you saying the same thing as Rabbah? Ema, you're right, V'chin Amar Rav Nachman. You're right. Rav Nachman is not coming to say anything new, but ultimately, again, Rav Nachman is coming to add on to Rabbah's statements. Rabbi says, this is incredibly important. Edim Zomin, the reciprocal payment, is a knas, is a penalty. Because it is a penalty, that's what Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, that if Edim admit that they are Edim Zomimin, then halacha l'maisa, they are not forced to pay reciprocal payment. How do we know that Edim Zomin is a knas? Because they didn't do a maisa, they didn't do anything, right? All they did is they proffered speech, right? They offered up eidos, and yet at the end of the day, there's still liability. Okay, says the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. We'll say second line, Gimel Adalef. Amar Yehuda Amar Rav. Eid zomim mishan lefi chalko. An eid zomim. This is a very interesting case, all right? An eid zomim, a zomim witness, and it's talking about a singular witness. Mishan lefi chalko. He pays his portion. So when it says, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Ilema, the high mishalim palga, the high mishalim palga, tanina, mishal shlomo, mishal shlomo malkas. So we'll say, so you tell me like this, right? Witnesses show up, right? Witness one, witness two. They claim that Ruvain stole $1,000 from Shimon. So they're looking to make Ruvain liable $1,000. Turns out they're Edim Zomamin. So what do? We say to them, okay, you have to pay $1,000. How do we split it? Witness one pays $500. Witness two pays $500. Okay, that's we already learned that, right? That's a mishnah. We split money, but we don't split malchus. Now, both sides. Now, this is very interesting. What does that mean? Well, we'll get into. When is this? We'll get to it over Yom Tov in 2 days from now. So listen to this. What this means is like this. Fascinating case. Witness one and two show up. What do they claim? They claim we saw Ruvain wear shatnez. Right? We saw Ruvain eat chazer. So we'll say, now what's the halacha of eat chazer? What's the halacha? Malchus. So now it turns out that a second set of witnesses show up and they say, you couldn't see Ruvain eating chazer because you were with us. Okay. So now we give Malchus to the Edim Zomamin. So let's say, let's assume for a moment, right? Malchus is 39. Let's call it 40. But it's really 39. 40. So you would have thought like this, right? Or I would have thought maybe witness one gets 20. It's not the way it works. Each of the witnesses get the full measure of Malchus because we split monetary awards or monetary knas, but not Malchus, right? So if let's say again, if they were going to make Ruvain Chayv $1,000, each witness will pay $500. But by Malchus, each one gets the full measure of Malchus. So we already learned that. So what is the Gemara teaching us? Elikagon is very interesting. So Elikagon, the itzum chad minayu, the mishalim paga didei. Our boss is fascinating. Rather, what does it mean? What does Rav's statement mean? That an Eid Zomin pays his share? What it means is like this. Let's say only one of the witnesses will be made into an Eid Zomin. Right? So for example, right, witness one and two show up and they say, we saw Ruvain steal $1,000 from Shimon on Friday. Okay? There's another set of witnesses show up and they say, witness one, you could not have seen that, you were with us. Now the second set of witnesses are only testifying about witness one. They're not testifying about witness two. So it sounds like what they could do is they can make witness one into an Eid Zomim, and he'll have to pay his portion. In other words, he won't have to pay the full $1,000. He'll pay $500 because that quote unquote was his portion of the Eidos. The Gemara says, 1 second. Omi Mishalim, does that actually work? V'atanya will learn. Ein Eid Zomim Mishalim Mamon Ad She'azu Mushneim. Both say it's not the way it works by Hazama, right? By reciprocal punishment, the way it works either is the entire testimonial unit is made into Eidim Zomimim, or none of them are Eidim Zomimim. In other words, you can't make one witness of the unit into an Eid Zomim. Doesn't work. Amar Rava says you're right. Ba'omer, Eidus Sheker He'arati. This is fascinating. What's the case? The case is where one of the witnesses shows up and he's supposed to say, again, same case, right? Witness 1 and 2 claim Reuven stole $1,000 from Shimon, trying to make Reuven liable to $1,000. Then one of the witnesses says, I'm sorry, I wanted the tshuva, it's almost the end of Pesach, tremendous isorus of change, freedom, ben chorin, and I lied. I'm not telling you, I didn't tell the truth. And therefore, again, and it sounds like Rav is saying, okay, we'll make him pay his share of $500. The Gemara says that doesn't work. So the Gemara says, Kol Kaminesi, he believed, Kevan Shehegit Shuvin Chozer Magid. We both say it's not the way it works by testimony. By testimony, the way it works is once you give your testimony, that's it. You are not believed to change your story. So this is really interesting. In other words, once you offer up your testimony in Beis Din, that's it. It's locked in. We do not believe you to change it. So how could a witness come along and say, I lied, and therefore make him liable to half of the $1,000? To which the Gemara says, Ella, rather, what's the case? This is very interesting. Ba'omer, he'adnu v'huzamnu Beis Din ploni. So the Gemara says, listen to this. What's the case? The case is where one of the witnesses, witness 1 shows up and he says, you know what? Me and witness 2, we testified in a different Beis Din. We were made into Eidim Zomimim. But then we escaped from that Beis Din. So I'm here now in this Beis Din number 2 to declare that I am an Eid Zomim. And therefore, again, I'm going to pay my portion. So Gemara says, well, that doesn't work. The Gemara says, Kiman, Rabbi Akiva. This obviously doesn't affect Rabbi Akiva. So we just finished Rabbi Akiva on the bottom of Beis and Beis. Why? Remember again about Rabbi Akiva holds, that's what? You can't pay as an Eid Zomim based on your own admission. Why not? Eid Zomim is a knas. And again, you can't pay a knas payment based on your own admission. So what's the case? So we'll say, so again, just to be clear, remember, we're just trying to figure out, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, that an Eid Zomim could pay his own portion, right? Mishalim fi chalko, based on his own admission, could be liable to his share. We're just trying to figure out what is that case. What is that case? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Ela ba'omer, he'adnu v'hizamnu bebeis din ploni v'chayvinu mamon. Oh, so this is very interesting. What's the case? The case is right where witness 1 shows up. Witness 1 shows up in Beis Din 2. Okay? Witness 1 in Beis Din 2. And what does witness 1 say in Beis Din 2? He says, listen, Beis Din 2. Right? Marana v'rabanan. Witness 2 and I testified in Beis Din 1, and we were found to be Eidim Zomimim, and Beis Din imposed the financial penalty upon us. So we're liable to $1,000. Now, something very interesting happens here. Even though we say that reciprocal payment, right, is Eidim Zomim is knas, once Beis Din passes the psak din, right, the verdict, once the verdict is delivered, and now Beis Din says witness 1 and 2, you're chayiv $1,000, that is now a debt. Because it's a debt, therefore what? It's mammon. It's money. It's not knas. And it's like any other debt that you're, in other words, after the verdict is delivered, that witnesses 1 and 2 are Eidim Zomimim, and now they're obligated to pay back Reuven $1,000. So again, even though the process of Eidim Zomimim is a knas, but once Beis Din delivers its verdict, that is now mammon. That is a debt that they owe. If it's a debt, then you can pay it based on your own admission. So when witness 1 shows up in Beis Din 2, right, and says, listen, witness 2 and I, we were found to be Eidim Zomimim in Beis Din 1, and Beis Din 1 delivered the verdict, and we're chayiv to Reuven. They wrote up the verdict, we're chayiv to Reuven $1,000, that is a financial obligation. So therefore, when witness 1 shows up in Beis Din 2 and says, I owe it, we believe him, and we let him pay his portion of $500 to Reuven. So the Gemara says, okay, it's interesting enough. Now what's fascinating about this? Who's chayiv in this case? Who's chayiv in this case? Witness 1. Who's not chayiv in this case? Witness 2. Why? Because witness 2 hasn't said anything. Witness 2 isn't coming forward with anything. So I might have thought that how could I obligate witness 1 to pay his share without obligating witness 2? No, we do. We look at it as 2 different things. Witness one is coming forward and saying he owes money. When someone comes forward and says that they owe money, what's our approach to that? What's our approach? Okay, right, fine, cash or credit. That's our approach. If you say you owe money, we'll take you at your word that you say you owe money. That's it. The fact that there's another witness involved in it, well, he's not saying anything, and your words, witness one, your admission can't have an impact on witness number two. Say, interestingly enough, if witness one comes along and says, we were made Eidim Zomim in another Beis Din, and that first Beis Din actually delivered the verdict, so made us chayiv as a debt $1,000, and now I stand before you in Beis Din number two, saying that I owe my portion. Beis Din 2 says, okay, pay up, no problem. We're happy to accept your payment. What's the implication of that on witness number two? Nothing, because witness number two didn't say anything. Incredible. All right, say Mishnah. Second Mishnah, second Makos, incredible. Me'idin anu es ish ploni, shegirish es ishto, v'noslas ksuvas. What's very interesting. So witness wanted to show up. They say, we saw Reuven divorce his wife, right? Friday, Erev Shabbos, right, the 13th of Nisan, we saw him divorce his wife, and he did not pay her ksuva. Didn't give her ksuva. Okay, so now what happens? Now the Gemara says, now interestingly enough, they're found to be Eidim Zomim. Okay, so second set of witnesses show up until the first set of witnesses. You cannot have seen that on Friday. You were with us burning the chametz, right? We were there the whole day, a lot of chametz. Right there the whole day. So you cannot have seen that Reuven divorced his wife. So now the question is, what do they pay in this scenario? So obviously they were trying to make Reuven pay the ksuva. So let's just say the ksuva was worth $50,000. So they're trying to make Reuven pay the ksuva. Now here's the problem. To just say that the Eidim Zomim have to pay $50,000, that doesn't make any sense. Why? Now it's possible, we'll say that what? That it would have ended up, now that Reuven would have ended up paying her the ksuva anyway. Now why would he end up paying her the ksuva anyway? Two possibilities. Either possibility one, they get divorced. Possibility two, he dies and his estate has to pay it to her. So it's not like, you see what I'm saying? Like in a classic case we were saying before, right? Witnesses show up and they say, witness one and two, Reuven stole $1,000 from Shimon. So they're trying to make Reuven liable to $1,000 that he would not be liable to without their testimony. So the halacha is reciprocal punishment, they pay $1,000. In this case, they were trying to get Reuven to pay the ksuva. So right now, Reuven doesn't owe the ksuva. But it could be that down the road he will owe the ksuva. In other words, we'll say there are so many different scenarios. Scenario one is that Rachel predeceases Reuven. If that's the case, there's no ksuva payment at all, and therefore, based on their testimony, they'd be depriving him of $50,000. Possibility two is that they get divorced. If they get divorced, he'd have to pay it anyway. And possibility three is that he predeceases her, in which case his estate would have to pay her. So Shaila is, in this case, what do the Eidim Zomim pay to Reuven? To which the Mishnah says, Omdin kama adam rotze litem b'ksuvasa shalzu shenis amala oniskarsha ve'emesa yirashana baila. So also it's interesting. So essentially, what we value this at is as like a ksuva future. Now, also we've seen this concept before that a woman has a right to sell her ksuva. Right, so let's say Rachel wants some extra money, so she decides to sell her ksuva. Now, what happens when a woman sells her ksuva? What is she selling? She's selling a future option. What she's saying is, my ksuva is worth $50,000. Now, I'm willing to sell it to you with the possibility that we're going to get divorced, right? Or my husband's going to die, and therefore I'll collect. But remember, again, there's also the other possibility, that's what she predeceases him. If she predeceases him, what does the buyer get? What does it get? Zero. So therefore, when you would sell a ksuva, bepashtos, you sell it at a steep discount. Right? Because again, although there's the possibility of a payout, there is, right? I guess you could check into the Shalom Bayis a little bit first, right? There's the possibility of a payout, right? But Lamaisa, there's also the possibility that you get absolutely nothing. So the Gemara suggests that's the amount that we make Eidim Zomim pay. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, Ketzad Shaman. So the Gemara itself says, by the way, how do we assess this payment? So Rav Chisda Bebal. So Rav Chisda says, ultimately, again, we do it based on the husband. Now, what does it mean based on the husband? What this means is like this. So the husband will say, again, for the ksuva, every husband, what's meshubed? What's meshubed? What is encumbered to the ksuva? From the husband, what is encumbered to the ksuva? Everything. Right? So this is very important. Right? The ksuva encumbrance devolves upon everything. Real property, movable property. Yes, and the ksuva we write, afilim in glima dal kaspai. Even the shirt on my back. everything is covered to the ksuva. So Rav Chisda seems to indicate that we look at the value of the property, encumbered to the ksuva. Right? Look at the value of the property encumbered to the ksuva, and that's the value. Again, that is what the Eidim would have deprived the husband of, and therefore that's what they have to pay. So what's the value of the property encumbered to the ksuva? And Allah said that's what they have to pay to the husband. Rav Nasser Oshia Omer no, Be'isha. No, Rav Nasser Oshia says really like what the Mishnah said, that halacha l'maisa, this is very interesting. We look at the following. How much would a person be willing to pay for the future rights of the ksuva? Right? And we subtract that amount from the actual value of the ksuva, and that's the amount that Eidim Zomim have to pay. Right? So in other words, we'll say, there's the value of the ksuva, we'll call it $50,000. Then if she were to sell the ksuva, how much could she sell it for? Let's call that $20,000. We look at those two values, and the Eidim Zomim are forced to pay the difference in those two values. The face value minus the future value, that's the amount ultimately, again, that they were seeking to deprive the husband of, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, they have to pay that. Amar Papa says, Be'isha or B'ksuvas. Papa says, halacha l'maisa, we're going to go like that second approach, that will do a difference between the face value and the future, we'll call it the future value, right? The future's value of that ksuva, right? We'll pay that amount, but we'll say, here's the chap. Remember, ksuva doesn't necessarily include everything that a husband would be obligated to his wife for upon divorce, right? There's other properties, there's nichsei som barzel, nichsei malug, other things like that. That does not come into the equation over here. The only thing Eidim Zomim are obligated for is what's written in the ksuva itself. So halacha l'maisa, the Gemara seems to end off is, if witnesses testify, we saw Reuven divorce Rachel, and he didn't pay her the ksuva, the halacha is they have to pay. What do they have to pay? The difference between the face value of the ksuva and the future's value of the ksuva. That difference is what they pay to the husband. Incredible. Mishnah. So what is very interesting. Witnesses show up. They say, we testify that Reuven owes Shimon $1,000. And it's $1,000 that is due within 30 days. That's halacha. The debt itself is due within 30 days. So I say, Nevahu Omer. Now Reuven himself says, no, not true. Now, interestingly enough, in this case, Reuven says, I owe Shimon $1,000. But it's not in 30 days, it's 10 years. It's 10 years. So now it turns out that the witnesses are Eidim Zomim, right? So they lied. Right? Second set of witnesses show up, they say, you can't know that Reuven owes Shimon $1,000 because on the day that the debt was made, you were with us. So as I said, interestingly enough, what do the witnesses pay over here? Because remember, again, interestingly enough, in this case, everyone is agreeing that's what? Reuven owes Shimon $1,000. What's the disagreement about? Not disagreement, but what were they lying about? The payment schedule. The Eidim Zomim said that the loan was due in 30 days. Right? Reuven said the loan was due in 10 years, and Reuven was right, and they lied. So what do? Very simple. The Gemara says, well, not very simple. Omden kama adam rosa litain the biyado elev zuz bein noslan mikan va'adlam yom bein noslan mikan va'ad eser shanim. So it's very simple, right? What do the Eidim Zomim have to pay? They have to pay like this. How much would a person pay? How much extra would a person be willing to pay to delay payment from 30 days to 10 years? Right? Essentially, how much would I be? What is the value of being able to pay back at a much later date? Whatever the animals say, there obviously is a value to that, right? There's absolutely a value to that. We know, again, that's how interest on loan works, right? The longer you can hold the money, so again, that represents something. So how much would a person pay? What is the value of being able to hold on to a loan of $1,000 for 10 years versus 30 days? And that difference in value, that's what the Eidim Zomim have to go ahead and pay to Reuven. Gemara. Amar Rabbi Shmuel. Hamalvis chaver le'asar shanim. This was an interesting case. Person goes ahead and lends his friend money for 10 years. 10-year loan. Shvius misham tarso. It's fascinating. Shmita will cancel the debt. The Gemara says, now here's what's fascinating about Amar Beis. V'hafagav dahashta lo karinan bei lo yigos. I will say, now the way it works by Shemitah, the Torah says as follows. The Torah says when the Shemitah year comes, lo yigos esrei ehu, which means you can't approach your friend for repayment. Right? You can't push him for repayment. I will say, interestingly enough, on a 10-year loan, Reuven is not pushing Shimon for repayment, right? Why? It's not due now. Right? Let's assume for a moment they made the loan on the first year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle. So in the Shemitah year number 7, Reuven's not approaching Shimon because the loan's not due. So even though, again, there is no element of lo yigos, nevertheless, like avagav the hachshel karina be lo yigos, sof asili de lo yigos. Ultimately, again, this loan will come to lo yigos. So I'll say, when will it come to lo yigos? In year number 10. In other words, even though it's not actively collected now, essentially what we say is like this. Any loan that ultimately, again, will become collectible is subject to Shemitah cancellation, which is fascinating. So what it sounds like is every loan, bless you, every loan, no matter how long the duration, right? You have a 30-year mortgage, it sounds like, again, you got that money from a Jew, sounds like Shemitah is going to cancel that, even though it's not coming due during the Shemitah year itself, because we apply lo yigos means any loan, ultimately, again, that will be collectible is canceled out by the Shemitah year. Gemara says, one second. Masir Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana, remember, brings out concept from the Mishnah. Omdin, Kama, let's go back to our Mishnah. So what was the Mishnah's case? Witness 1 and 2 show up, and then what do they say? They say, Reuven borrowed $1,000 from Shimon, and he owes Shimon that money back when? Within 30 days. Right? Reuven claims that I owe it back 10 years later. 10 years later. Sa'ai says the Gemara, so what do? We go ahead and we differentiate between the value that a person would pay to have a loan for 30 days versus 10 years. But 1 second, Master of Kano, Kama Adam wrote, Litain you elevzus biyado, ben litain mekan bad lamiyom, ben litain mekan bad esham. That's just quoting the Mishnah. But that doesn't make any sense. V'i amrit shvius misham taso. Now, if you hold that Shemitah cancels a loan, even if it's not due during the Shemitah year, then what Rabbi was saying? When in reality, so the witnesses should have to pay Reuven the full $1,000. Why? Because in the way the loan was structured, what was going to happen to Reuven's loan from Shimon? What was going to happen to it? It was going to be canceled by Shemitah, right? Meanwhile, when the witnesses say that it's due within 30 days, they're making him fully liable for a loan. In other words, so in the way that they're claiming the loan happened, Reuven would be chayiv $1,000. But ultimately, again, in the way that it actually happened, Shemitah would actually cancel this debt. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, so if you say that Shemitah cancels the debt, even if the debt is not due during the Shemitah year, that means they were looking to make Reuven liable for the full $1,000 when he really would have been exempt from that because Shemitah would have canceled it. So the Gemara says, no. How come I ask? What's the case over here? The Gemara says it's incredible. The case over here is that halacha l'maisa, in this loan that Reuven borrowed from Shimon, they had a mashkon. They had collateral, or they handed over the debt to Beis Din, which is what we call pruzbal. So we'll say this is very important. So in other words, interesting, just as an aside, Shemitah cancels debts, but Shemitah doesn't cancel all debts. So, for example, there are two elements over here. If you have a loan that has a collateral, then Shemitah doesn't cancel that debt. Why? Because the collateral makes it as if the loan has already been collected, right? That's what collateral is. Collateral is a form of repayment. So, since there is an already existing form of repayment, therefore, Allah Shemitah does not cancel such a debt. The other thing that prevents Shemitah from canceling is what we call a pruzbal. Rashi says over here, if you look at Rashi, first short line, and Rashi, Moser Shtaros of Beis Din, who pruzbal, shehiskin hilo, shekasuv bo, mosrani lachem ploni uploni hadayanin, shebemakom ploni, shekol chov sheyishli, she'agbenu kobzman she'ertza. So this is exactly it, right? This is exactly it. So they gave a pruzbal. So the Gemara is suggesting over here, this case in the Mishnah is different because it could very well be that Reuven is not arguing that he borrowed money from Shimon, right? He did. The machlokes over here is about the duration. Edim Zoman are saying 30 days, right? And Reuven is saying 10 years. But even so, Shemitah would not have canceled this debt. Why not? Because this was a collateralized loan, or there was a pruzbal. Okay, Disnan, Hamal va'al hamashkon, va'amos yeshtaros of Beis Din, Ein mishamtin. So it says halacha l'maisa. If you go out and you lend on collateral, or you make a pruzbal, Shemitah does not cancel your debt. So fine. Well, so that's the first version of this discussion. Now the Ikadami is very important because it's actually the halacha l'maisa. So Ikadami, alternate version of this discussion. Rabbi Shmuel, Hamal ve'es chaveru le'eser shanim, Ein shvius misham taso. So we'll say the alternate version of this is if you lend your friend money for 10 years, Shemitah does not cancel the debt. Okay? So it says, even though ultimately this loan will come to loigos, which means even though one day this loan, of course, will become collectible, hashta miha lo karina be loigos. Right now, it's not subject to loigos. In other words, according to this version, you saw this machlokas. According to this version, Shemitah only cancels debts that are due now. The loigos now, but debts that are due later on down the road, Shemitah does not cancel. So, Rav Kahana, Af anan nami tanina. We learn this as well. Omdin kama adam rosa litem v'yu elev zuz biado ben litem mikan v'alam yom ben litem mikan v'as sharm. So, this is our Mishnah, right? Witnesses show up. Witnesses 1 and 2 show up, and they say Reuven borrowed $1,000 from Shimon, and it's due within 30 days. Reuven claims not due within 30 days, due within 10 years. Do it in 10 years. So what do we do? Now it turns out that the witnesses are Eidim Zomin. So what do they have to pay? We assess the difference in value. How much would a person be willing to pay to delay payment from 30 days to 10 years? That's the amount they have to pay. Now, v'amrit shvius misham taso, kulunami by shlumile. But again, halacha l'maisa, if Shemitah really canceled debts, even that weren't due during the Shemitah year, then it turns out that halacha l'maisa, the way the loan was structured, Shemitah would have canceled it. Based on the Eidim Zomimin, Reuven would have to pay it, which means that Reuven should have to pay, the witnesses should have to pay the entire amount to Reuven. Rav says, no, I'm asking you, what's the case over here? The milva al hamashkon. We're talking about, again, collateralized loan, ubemoser shtaros of lebezdin, and one who does a prosbol, this nan hamalva al hamashkon, if one lends with collateral, the hamoser shtaros of lebezdin, or one does a prosbol, ein mashmitin. Ultimately, again, it does not go ahead, and Shemitah does not wipe out the debt. Incredible. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, I just want to point out that the halacha l'maisa of the Mishnah remains the same, which is, again, witnesses 1 and 2 show up and they say, Reuven owes Shimon $1,000 due in 30 days. Right? Reuven says back, I owe him the money, but it's 10 years from now. Second set of witnesses show up and they say, first set of witnesses, you're lying, you were with us. You were with us, you couldn't have seen the loan or anything else. So what's the halacha? What do the witnesses pay? They pay the value. How much would a person be willing to pay to delay payment from 30 days to 10 years? That's the amount that they have to pay. Now, in the midst of this, Rabosai, is a fascinating machlok. Okay, so a couple of shmita. So now, machlok is shmita, which we'll come back to. The machlok is shmita is, everyone agrees that shmita cancels debts that are due during the shmita year. Shaila is, does shmita cancel debts that are due after the shmita year? That is a machlokes. That's a machlokes. Everyone also agrees that Shemitah doesn't cancel either collateralized loans or prosbol loans, right? Why? The logic is the same. Ultimately, again, because those loans are already considered to be collected, right? Collateralized loan, when there's collateral is a source of repayment, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, a collateralized loan is already considered to be as if it's been repaid, and therefore, Shemitah will not cancel it. Prosbol, again, we'll get into the dynamics of prosbol by itself. Good. Amar Shmuel. Person says to his friend, Amanas shelo tishmeteni shvius mishametas. So this is interesting. So let's say I loan money to Reuven. I say, Reuven, I'm giving you a 7-year loan. I'm lending you money on the condition that Shemitah does not cancel this loan. So what's the halacha? What does Shmuel say? Shvius mishametas. Shemitah cancels the loan. Okay, so we'll say there seems to be a simple rule. You can't make a condition which runs contrary to Torah law. And if you do so, your condition is batal. So to make a condition that Shemitah doesn't cancel a loan, when Shemitah cancels loans, is essentially an irrelevant condition. Irrelevant condition, the Gemara says, one second. Listen to this. Let's say I sell Reuven an object, right? And I say to Reuven, I'm selling you the object on the condition that you have no claim of ona on me, right? Remember again, ona means halachos of overcharging. Say to Reuven, I'm selling you this item, which probably means I'm significantly overcharging him, right? But I sell him the item on the condition that he has no claim of ona against me. So what's the halacha? Rav Amar yesh la alav ona, u'Shmuel Omer eina lo alav ona. So Rav says ultimately again, I have no ona, and Shmuel says I do. But 1 second, why would Shmuel say that I do? Shmuel just got finished saying that if I lend Reuven money, I say, Reuven, here's the loan on the condition that Shemitah does not cancel it. Such a tenai, such a condition is void. Why? Because you cannot make a condition which runs contrary to Torah law. So over here, there's a Torah law of ona. How could I go ahead and engage in a transaction? We're saying that there's no ona. Shmuel says, no. Very interesting. So listen to this. I'll explain this to you. I'm supposed to say everything is how you say it. If I sell Reuven an object, right, and I say to Reuven, I'm selling you this object on the condition that there is no ona. If it turns out that, let's say, I overcharged him by more than a sixth, so we'll say, then there's ona. In other words, you can't say, to say that there is no ona, that's a factual statement. So either there is ona or there is not ona. If there is ona, just because you said there's no ona, right, doesn't matter. Right, we'll say you can't change realities. Right, realities are what they are. So therefore, if halacha l'maisa again, I'm overcharging by more than a sixth, that is ona, and therefore my statement is meaningless. If, however, I say to Reuven, I'm selling you this object on the condition that you have no claim of ona against me, that works. Why? Because there, what is Reuven doing? Reuven is giving up a right. Right, when a transaction is more than a sixth, then ultimately, again, there is a right on the part of the purchaser to claim ona. You could yield rights. You can't change realities. You also hear this distinction. So when you say, I'm selling you this item on the condition that there is no ona, if there is ona, there is ona. The fact that you said there is no ona, right, at the end of the day doesn't change the reality. If, however, I say to Reuven, I'm selling you this object on the condition that ein lo alav ona, you have no claim of ona, and Reuven says, okay, then Reuven is giving up his rights. Giving up your rights, giving up your claim, you're allowed to do. Hakanami, so to over here. If a person says, right, I say to Reuven, I'm lending you this money on the condition that Shemitah, Amanas shelo tishmiteni b'shvius ein shvius misham taso. So ultimately, I want to say, so essentially, if right, I'm going to read the next one. Amanas shelo tishmiteni shvius misham taso. So same thing. If I lend Reuven money, I say, Reuven, I'm lending you money on the condition that Shemitah will not cancel the debt. Right? So again, Shemitah cancels the debt. Why? Because Shemitah, you can't change Shemitah. On the other hand, if I say to Reuven, I'm going ahead and lending you this money on the condition shelo tishmiteni b'shvius, that you will not cancel the debt on Shemitah, that works. Why? Because what's happening over here? Reuven is waiving his Shemitah right. So Reuven, as the borrower, has the right to say, the loan will continue even past Shemitah. I don't have the right or the ability to go ahead and change the reality of how Shemitah works. So we'll say this fundamental distinction. When you make a Tanai that tries to change reality, that does not work. It's no batal. But when you make a Tanai that essentially allows the other person to yield their rights, if they choose to yield their rights, they have the ability to do so. So if Reuven wants to yield the right of a forgiven debt and continue to pay the debt, that's his right. If Reuven wants to yield the right of ona, that's his right. But you can't change realities with your words. Incredible. Tana. So it says Tana. Hamal. So okay, let's say, but there's so. I just want to point out, if you think about this in just like a societal way, like this is one of the concepts that is so lost on us, right? That in other words, one of the things that we struggle with now contemporarily as a society is this notion that you could say things, and just because you say it, realities change, right? Whether that's in matters of gender, whether it's matters like it doesn't work that way. Realities now, again, a person has a right to do what they want with themselves, right? In other words, as an individual, as a yachid, I have a right to make decisions about myself, but I can't change realities. There are de facto realities that exist in this world. And just because you say something, you can't change it. You could change your personal circumstances, right? You could change you. You could forgive certain rights that you have, but you can't change realities with words. So again, to say Shemitah will not cancel that debt, that is a false statement. Shemitah cancels debts. To say there is no onah in this transaction, you can't say that. There is onah in the transaction. But to say, I'm lending you this money on the condition that you will not exercise your Shemitah cancellation, okay, that works. To say that you will not exercise or you yield your onah rights, that works. That works. Incredible. I will say, Tana, Hamavis Chaver Stam. In Rosh Tovo, supposed to say, I'm just going to use the last. We'll stop over here for today. We're fine. These are like babelach, these dapim, right? Mamish. It's nothing. Dapalach, right? Nothing. Right? So just to share with you, just a short idea as we go into Yom Tov. It struck me, and I'm very, very, very just very overwhelmed a little bit by this. Just a little bit overwhelmed by this Erev Shabbos, and we're all overwhelmed by the Erev Shabbos going into Yom Tov. Not overwhelmed like in a bad way. It's just like what's fascinating to me most is the prolongation of like B'dikas Chametz, right? It's fascinating, right? Because in other words, we did the B'dika last night. We're going to burn this morning by whatever it is, 11:32, right? 37, right? But interestingly enough, right? But really, you could still clean your house today. Like in other words, this it's actually nice. Like in other words, I can say again, don't do that. Better to finish everything up this morning. But again, I still have chametz in my house. We're eating chametz. You eat chametz on Shabbos. You make a l'chaim. Right. In other words, that I'm still doing all of this stuff. Right. And through tomorrow morning. Right. So tomorrow morning we'll finish eating chametz by 10:30. 10:22, right? Burn, right? Kol chamira by 11:37. Good, right? So it's just fascinating. Just the prolongation, right? The elongate of this process. So it could very well be that this avoda of this year is mamish like in this bedikas chametz bir chametz. So I saw something beautiful. The Ramah Paskins. We said it last night, right? Last night we said kol chamira. Now, the Kol Chamira last night is a Kol Chamira about Chametz you don't know about. So the Darkei Moshe says that we say Kol Chamira b'Lashon Aramis. We say it in Aramaic, right? So in the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, he says, why Lashon Aramis? That was the vernacular. The idea is you're supposed to say Kol Chamira in any language that you understand. That's why, again, if you don't understand Kol Chamira, the Chazisi, the Lo Chazisi, the Chamite, the Lo Chamite, if you don't understand those things, say it in English. Say it in English. So say it in any language that you understand. That's why the Ramah says Aramaic, that was the vernacular. The Ber Heitev quotes from the Seder Hayom. And the Seder Hayom says, no, there's another reason we say it in Aramaic. Why? Because the Malachim don't speak Aramaic. And I don't want the Malachim to understand my Kol Chamira. Okay? So Seder Hayom says, what's the pshat? This is incredible. Because what does Kol Chamira say? Kol Chamira says, like, any bread that I have, any chametz, I don't want it. I don't want it. It's ownerless. It's like hefker ka'afradar. It's like dust of the earth. And if the Malachim hear this, and they say, look, bread is sustenance. Bread is the staple of life. And look how dismissive these Jews are about their bread. They don't care about the sustenance you give them. They don't care about the lechem you give them. And it will incite the malachim to advocate against us on high. Profound. And therefore, again, we say Kol Chamir in Aramaic in order that the malachim should not understand it. Perhaps there's an additional idea also I would say in Aramaic. I will say the power of B'dikas Chametz. And this fuels us. Last night through today, the Svarim bring down, we know, the Zohar brings down already, that Chametz is representative of the Yetzer Hara. And when we do B'dikas Chametz, what are we doing? Yes, it's true, I'm looking for the Chametz, the external Chametz. But really what I'm doing is the search for external Chametz is really just to be the catalyst for the search for internal Chametz. That's really what I'm doing last night and today and through tomorrow morning. That's why we have this long window, right? To look for internal chametz. What is the chametz that resides inside of my heart, inside of my life? What are the things that I just need to purge myself of? Or in other words, what bedikas chametz and ultimately bir chametz represents is the power of change. That I have the ability to get rid of the chametz from inside of me. I have that ability. That is my right. That is my ability. You know what I'm saying? If there's one thing that man could do, that we could do, that malachim can't do, it's what? Change. Malachim can't change. Malachim can't evolve. A malach can't wake up one morning and say, you know what, today is the day I'm going to be the best version of my angelic self. A malach is what it is. there's no change, there's no transcendence, there's no evolution, there's nothing. There's nothing. The greatest part of being a Yid, the greatest part of being a human being is the ability to change. And Bedikas Chametz, in its essence, represents that power of change. That ability to find your inner Chametz, the ability to get rid of it, and the ability to either become someone different, become someone better, or just move myself forward in life. Perhaps that's the pshat of the Seder Yom as well. We don't say Kol Chamira, we only say Kol Chamira in Aramaic, right? Really, you say, why? The Malachim shouldn't understand it. Why should the Malachim understand it? Because I don't want to create tension between myself and the Malachim. Because if the Malachim could see that I could change, and they can't, that creates kina, that creates jealousy between Eretz and Shamayim. So we'll say it in a language that they don't understand, knowing full well for ourselves that we possess the greatest koach in the world, a koach that even the Malachim don't possess, the koach to change, the koach to get rid of our chametz, the koach to become someone even greater. And Chevra, we have a long window, an elongated window for Bedikas Chametz this year. It started last night, it goes through today, goes through tomorrow morning. May we Zocha Meretz Hashem to be able to use this golden opportunity to, yes, get rid of all the external chametz, but also be courageous enough to go ahead and find the internal chametz and be able to do something so great that even the Malachim can't accomplish it. We'll say a good Erev Shabbos and a good Yantiv. All right, Chevra on Zoom. Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, good Yantiv. Great to see everyone.